let's see, my name is Wendy. I actually started diving in the Pacific Northwest. When I moved here from the Midwest, there was ocean and mountains and a lot of things that were kind of new and magical. And so as part of the move, I started going into the ocean, and then met my partner who's crazy about freediving and spearfishing, and really learned to kind of keep him safe. I didn't want him to die. So, I knew the sport was dangerous, and also I really love the water. So I got to see him do something he loved, and then it grew to be something that I love. And also I think I've kind of always come to it from a safety perspective, because it was just so important to me from the beginning that we live really long, great lives.
I'm actually here today. You have an experience, and even myself as someone who's been in the activity for a long time, I thought it was an absolutely great takeaway, piece of knowledge for everyone to know. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that story with us.
Yeah, so the story I have to share is actually not something that was even really gone over in my freediving course. It wasn't something that I found to be really part of the conversation in freediving circles or spearfishing circles. And it's because it's really like a worst case scenario situation. But I was involved in a situation where there was someone found in the water, face down, starfish, no pulse, and unknown downtime. And I think that is a really important story to talk about, because worst case scenario, I think we all want to be prepared in that situation to revive someone. And I realized that there were some pieces of both like drowning CPR and a water rescue that I didn't have all the way in my head. So it was really helpful, kind of, one, to be in that situation with other people. And then, the outcome was good, but it was just a really important reminder to me to be familiar with that information. So the situation was, I was actually farther out in the water, and a woman from our group was found face down, unresponsive, and pretty quickly moved to shore by some other people in the water. And during that process, completely limp, and they got her to shore and dragged her up maybe 10 or 15 feet, kind of to the tide line, and found that she didn't have a pulse quite quickly. And one kind of good reminder, especially when someone's in a bathing suit, is that the femoral pulse, so checking for a really easy to go to pulse and knowing where pulses are, is something that's helpful if you're ever in that situation. And so the main person who pulled her out happened to be a flight paramedic. So that was also really incredible to have someone with a lot of emergency skill. However, for drowning, one really important thing to remember is just it's a hypoxic event, most likely. And so, if you're taking someone a long way and you're safe and you're swimming okay in the water, you can even do rescue breaths while swimming if you're keeping yourself safe. But as soon as you get someone onto whatever surface, the CPR is reversed. So it's actually 2 breaths first, and then you start compressions. And one of the big takeaways for us with the compressions was that sand is absolutely not an appropriate surface for compressions. So there was no way to get appropriate chest recoil. And part of the resuscitation was getting a surfboard and putting that under her. So we had a really firm surface. And then also, if there's only one rescuer, remembering that you're still doing rescue breathing with drowning, which if there's only one rescuer, a lot of times, and it's not a drowning situation, you might just focus on the chest. And then another thing that came up quite quickly is that people very, very commonly vomit when you're giving CPR. But for drowning, it doesn't necessarily, she hadn't just eaten, so it doesn't look like chunks of food. It looks like water coming up. And so kind of what we thought at the time was, all this water is in her lungs. And, the right thing was done either way, which was to turn her over and clear her airway. And we didn't do like a finger sweep. That's something that probably should have been done, because even though, you're doing the chest compressions and you can see kind of water coming up out of the mouth, it's most likely still from the stomach. And so when you're turning them over, thinking that there could still be food as part of that, and doing a finger sweep to make sure you're clearing the airway. So in this situation, we had people to rotate compressions. We had someone who was counting compressions and counting time between people who were giving compressions and making sure people were rotating. So all those things, I think we're very lucky that we had that there. We also had people on the beach they got like someone's portable oxygen from a resort nearby. They did not get the right adapter, so they had to go back. But there were kind of people reaching for resources from every which way. And definitely in that situation, had that not been the case from the onset, that so many people were aware, making sure someone is calling emergency services right away, screaming, shouting, calling for help, and getting as many resources on board. And that was very lucky that came to pass. And then so her pulse came back. And so someone had their kind of hand on the femoral pulse the whole time. But it was thready. And so just because someone's pulse comes back, that doesn't mean you're done with the resuscitation. So, they're continuing rescue breathing and continuing to keep an eye on her pulse and compressions. So, her downtime, again, we had like a recorder. There were people with waterproof watches all over, which was really wonderful. So the total time of the resuscitation was 8.5 minutes without a pulse, but unknown downtime in the water. And toward the end, she started to not become fully conscious, but move a little bit, and we were able to get her into the ambulance. And then that's always the shock too, is that then the situation's over and someone's been transported out and you're kind of left on the beach just kind of in a bit of shock. And so, after any safety event, a debrief, and making sure that you're talking through, even if you'll never see those people again, like the decisions that were made and learning from them in some way. So, but definitely, the longer downtime, the more concern there is. And so I think that's part of why someone was, trying to really keep track of how long, because time just feels really different when your arms are getting tired from CPR and your, kind of brain's going 100 miles a minute. I did some reading afterwards, and, was reflecting that the temperature of the water can also be a factor in downtime. And there's all these different pieces that mean that someone can sustain more or less injury, and definitely a longer downtime is one of them. The other thing with that downtime, and just the fact that, she died, she had no pulse and she lost consciousness, and is that then she was at risk for both dry drowning and secondary drowning. So just because you come out of the water and you get your pulse back doesn't mean you're kind of out of the woods. There's still a risk if there was water that had gotten into her lungs that, many hours later, even 24 hours later, it could cause pulmonary edema, and you could still have an emergency event. And so definitely still going to a hospital and taking the recommendation of, whatever the emergency staff there have in terms of the time that you want to stay and be supervised. For that reason is really important. Well, so a big contributing factor to that was this person had a health condition, and she didn't tell any of us who were in the water with her, who knew her. And so definitely if we had known, she would have been someone that I think we watched more closely, that, there was always someone with her, that, not that she shouldn't have been in the water, but that we would have protected each other much better. And so sharing critical information about health conditions that can affect you in the water, maybe could have prevented such a large emergency from occurring, because there would have been someone who could have kept a closer eye on her and been right there.
Thank you for sharing that and bringing that lesson to us.
You're welcome.